Welcome, everybody. Still people joining us, but we will kick off. It's great to see you all here. I'm Bidda Jones. I'm Director of Strategy at the Australian Alliance for Animals, and with me to co-host this webinar is Dr. Jed Goodfellow, our Director of Policy and Government Relations. Hey, Jed. And we've also got Nadia from our team taking care of all the tech for us tonight. Thank you, Nadia. Hopefully everything will run smoothly. So before I go on any further, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Walbanja country in the Yuin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of these lands and all the lands that we're meeting on today, and to recognise the enduring connections of First Nations people to their land, sea, and community. So while it's just going to be Jed and me presenting to you, I wanted to just point out that the election campaign that we're going to be talking about is really very much a joint effort. The clue is in our name. We are an alliance for animals, and it's the collaboration with our members and our partners that's fundamental to our success. So I'd like to thank each of our member organisations and our partners at the Keep the Sheep Here campaign for all their hard work and their support during this campaign. And look, what an interesting few weeks it's been watching the election results come in. I don't think I've ever seen an election that has been quite as interesting as this, and maybe as unexpected as this election. We've had leaders come and go. The coalition has broken up and got back together again. There's still one seat that's too close to call, and we've still got some senators yet to be decided. And here we are at the end of May. But we're here to talk about what all this means for animals, and to give you an insight into how the Alliance organised and delivered our election scorecard campaign. So yeah, this slide is just giving you an outline of what to expect. We're going to have a chat about our pre-election political engagement. Then I'll talk a bit about the campaign timeline and the impact we had in terms of advertising. Then Jed will talk about what the election results mean for animals. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. We'll be reserving about 20 minutes for that Q&A session. You'll be able to ask us questions directly during that session by raising your hand virtually, or by posting a question in the chat function. So go ahead and post those at any time. So yes, pre-election political engagement. Let's kick off with that. Let me explain first why we have such a focus on election scorecard campaigns at the Alliance. What are we actually aiming to achieve with these campaigns? Well, we've got two main types of goals. We've got those that are aimed at the public, and we've got those that are aimed at politicians. With the public goals, we're using the scorecards to raise awareness of party positions on animal welfare. We also want to put animals on the political map. So really make the connection between animal welfare and who you vote for. But it's not just about helping you make that decision in terms of exposing you to animal welfare policies. It's also about trying to get politicians to commit to policy reform. So we've got these three goals that we're aiming for when we're talking about politicians, talking to politicians. We want to secure support from them for policy reforms. So we're talking to major parties and independents in that regard. We also want to place pressure on candidates in targeted electorates. But ultimately, all of those things are about increasing the probability that the reforms that we're asking for will be implemented by an incoming government. So that's what it's all about. Those are the goals that we're trying to achieve. But the starting point for our engagement ahead of the campaign is a list of policy asks. This is the list that we took to this election, 6 policies that we were seeking support for from political parties and key independents. So Yeah, I'm just going to ask Jed because he's the one who's having these conversations and talking about these policies. I'm going to bring Jed in. Can you tell us what the thinking was behind choosing these six specific policies that we took to this election?
Yeah, thanks, Bidda. And of course, yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into determining what policies we're going to take to particular elections, and we also engage with all of our members as well in determining these policies. But I won't go into all of the factors, but we have essentially a decision making matrix. But they include factors like considering the potential impact of the policy on animal welfare, of course. It's one of the primary considerations, how many animals will be affected and in what way if these policies are adopted and implemented. We also look at the feasibility or the likelihood of success with these policies in terms of getting major party support and actually seeing these policies implemented, because we don't want to be proposing or wasting our time with proposals that really have no chances of success. So we look at feasibility. We also look at things like the clarity of the policy ask as well, because the more complex a policy proposal is, particularly around election time, the less likely it is for parties and candidates to be able to get their head around the policy and to then provide their support for it as well. So we look at those sort of factors. Also alignment with our policy reform goals, of course, with the Alliance's reform agenda, and also the priorities of our members as well. So that's how we arrived at these six policies.
Thanks, Jed. And obviously, if anyone's got questions about these, you can pop them in the chat now. We'll talk about those questions at the end. But let's talk about the policy asks themselves. So, top of this list is protecting the live sheep export phase out. Why is this particular ask so important?
Well, this was a really important one because, of course, as many of you will know, the Labor government committed to phasing out live sheep exports at the last election, and indeed at the election prior to that as well in 2019. And credit to Labor, they followed through with that in government, and they passed legislation to phase out the trade by 1 May 2028. But as we saw leading up to the election campaign, the coalition adopted a position of seeking to repeal that legislation and to support the live sheep export trade. So it was very much a live issue for this election. And it was really important and indeed incumbent upon our movement as a whole to support and to back in that policy with the Australian public leading into the election. The industry was mounting a very strong campaign against the phase-out policy and against the Labor Party in general. So it was incumbent upon us to also communicate to the Australian public about the need for maintaining that policy and phasing out the trade as well. And indeed, this had broader implications than just the live sheep export trade as well, because if the Labor Party was to suffer electorally because of this policy, and indeed if they lost the election, then it would be unlikely that the Labor Party would commit to any progressive animal welfare reforms in the future as well. It would provide a significant disincentive for them to do so. So by demonstrating to them, and indeed demonstrating to all political parties, that if they come on board with strong animal welfare policies, then they're going to be rewarded for that because of the fact that we're going to be communicating that to millions of people around the country. That provides an incentive for parties to adopt stronger animal welfare policies. So it was broader than just live sheep exports, but of course, maintaining the phase out was extremely important in and of itself as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jed. And what about the next two policies? So these are about establishing a National Animal Welfare Commission and funding the animal welfare strategy. Can you tell us a bit about the significance of these?
Yeah, so both of these policies go to essentially national leadership in animal welfare and creating a more independent framework for developing national standards. And of course, the National Animal Welfare Commission is a key or a cornerstone feature of the Alliance's policy reform agenda. We see that that's absolutely necessary to change the way animal welfare is governed in Australia and to create a more independent framework so that we see further progress on animal welfare across the board. And indeed, the funding of the Australian animal welfare strategy is also extremely important because while the Labor government did commit to renewing the animal welfare strategy at the last election, and they've made some progress towards that, we haven't seen a commitment of funding to the implementation of the strategy. So the strategy is still being developed as we speak. They're looking at 2027 for the date at which the strategy will be completed, which of course is a long time frame. But it's really important that there's going to be sufficient funding to then see to the implementation of the strategy as well. So that's why we had that commitment and that proposal in there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jed. And I know the department is still talking about the word if in front of implementation, not when. So that extra funding is going to be really crucial. The next one I can speak to. I mean, this is really important to the Alliance, our members, but also to the broader charity sector. Those charities that are involved in advocacy, and in our case, animal welfare advocacy, don't currently have tax deductible status. And this affects our ability to get funding and do the work that we exist to do. So we have been working with a whole range of other charities to try and get this changed. In the last term of government, there was a Productivity Commission report that was very supportive of that. But to date, the government hasn't responded to that, hasn't adopted the recommendations. So we felt this was something that really needed to be included in the policy asks to gain support for that important change. The next two are sort of back to actual animal welfare policy, promoting animal welfare and trade agreements and the trophy hunting ban. Can you just tell us what these are about, Jed?
Yeah, so promoting animal welfare and trade agreements was that the policy ask was for parties to support the development of an animal welfare trade policy that would then guide the Australian government's approach to negotiating free trade agreements with other countries, with the view to one, recognising animal welfare in those agreements and protecting animal welfare. So, and that has the added benefit of promoting animal welfare standards within international trade norms, and also of protecting Australia's standards of animal welfare and not allowing them to be undermined by sort of cheap imports coming into the country that are produced to standards that would be illegal under Australian standards. So yeah, a really important policy there. And the last one on expanding the trophy hunting import ban. We currently have a trophy hunting import ban, but it only relates to 3 species of animals. So we were seeking for that to be expanded to all species that are protected under CITES. And that's a really important goal of some of our members who have been working on this issue for many years. And it was a very sort of feasible policy reform that we could see a lot of support from the Australian public for. So we included that as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jed. So once we've settled on these policies, the next stage is actually trying to get parties and candidates to commit to them. How easy is it to do that, to get responses from the parties and candidates?
Yeah, it's a bit of a process. It's certainly not an easy one. I wish it was just, sending a letter and then waiting for the response. But we had strategies for the engagement with the major parties, so different strategies for each major party. Generally, it does follow starting off with a formal letter to the parties, because you've got to formally put it on the record that you're writing to them about these policies. But then there is a long process of following up and negotiation with the parties and candidates as well. So indeed, for Labor and the Liberal Party, we started engagement negotiations with them way back at the start of last year, 2024, on some of these proposals. So socialising them with key figures within the party, and then starting to talk through them, providing briefings and so forth. But then when it comes to the crunch at the first half of this year, when the election campaign was drawing nearer and nearer, We wrote the formal letters, and then we started the essentially the process of just following up and engaging with different and multiple elements of the parties as well. So with the parliamentary members of the parties, but then also in the case of Labor, it was the ministers' offices as well. So their advisors within those offices. And also party officials as well within the major parties. The major parties will have entire teams that are set up just to deal with election policy asks from different interest groups. So it was engaging with those teams as well. With the individual candidates and the independent members, a little bit of an easier process there because you're basically just dealing with the candidate and then one or two advisors. But for the major parties, it's more of a complex process. And then eventually, when a response is received, then there's generally a period of negotiation over the wording of those responses as well, so that we can get the strongest responses and the strongest commitments from the parties. So I spent probably about 2 to 3 months of a large component of my time at the start of the year was just doing party engagement to secure these commitments from them.
Yeah, but it's such a crucial part of it. And they like to keep us waiting right to the very, very end, which can be quite difficult given that all of those ticks and crosses on every single piece of advertising we put out rely on those party responses. So it's a bit of a nail-biting process, and a lot of work involved in that. Look, one of the other key parts of the process is choosing the seats, the particular electorates that are targeted with advertising. I'll put a list up of those that we selected in this election. Can you just talk us through how we arrived at this list of seats? What's special about them? Why did we pick these?
Yeah, look, this is another complex process and another decision that requires a consideration of multiple factors and pieces of advice from multiple different sources as well, expert sources, political analysts, and so forth. And as you can probably see, well, if you follow politics closely, most of those seats that we did land on, so 18 of our target electorates, are seats that consist of either a incumbent independent or prominent independent candidates, with the exception of the seats in WA there. And that was largely based on the fact that at the time we were deciding on which seats to target, there was a general, almost consensus among political commentators and analysts that whichever party was to succeed, it would be a minority government in the sense that the independents would be required in order to provide enough support within the parliament for legislation to pass. So we were expecting that the independents were again going to play a major role in the new Parliament. And indeed, the outcome of the election is that most of those independents were returned and they're still got a sizable block within the Parliament. But of course, the Labor Party did succeed in obtaining a major majority, so they won't be reliant upon those independent members. But we did hedge our bets, I guess you could say, and we chose seats also that were very important to both the Labor Party and the Liberal Party to ensure that there was enough incentive there for them to come on board with those policy commitments. So there's a spread across the country and a spread of electorates there that are of sort of equal concern to Labor, Liberal, the Liberal Party, and those key independents as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jed.
I guess, sorry, Bidda, just one final comment. One of the common factors, or two of the common factors with all of these seats is that almost all of them are marginal in nature. So they were very much in play during the election. And I guess the constituents of all of these electorates were very supportive of our policy reform goals as well, which the candidates were very well aware of as well, which again provided further leverage for that getting support for the policies.
Yeah, yeah, great. So this is where we landed in terms of the scorecard. And just to point out, the Alliance is a charity, so we can provide people with information on what different political parties on where they arrived at in terms of their positions on these different policies. But one thing we can't do is tell people how to vote. We can't promote a party, we can't promote a candidate. That's not something that charities are able to do. So all we can do is say, here are the policies that these different parties and candidates have. That's going to inform you when you're voting, but we can't do any more than that. So just wanted to make it clear that that's our role in this situation is not to actually tell people who they should be voting for. But could you just talk us through quickly, because I think we probably need to move on fairly fast, but just, yeah, what this tells us.
Yeah, well, as you can see there with some of the major parties, of course, our friends in the Greens and the Animal Justice Party supported all of the policies without sort of qualification. So, yeah, all green ticks there for alignment with those policy asks. Unfortunately, with the Liberal and National parties, there was really no support for any of the policies, which was really disappointing, particularly from the Liberal Party, because we did engage with them extensively over the course of a year, trying to get support at least for some of those policies. But I think, courtesy of the strategy they took to the election, and the leadership of Peter Dutton, it was very much taking a pretty hard conservative line and not tolerating divergence from the strategy. We didn't get any support, even though we had a lot of positive engagement with those members who we did meet with. And then finally, the Labor response, as you can see there was complete or partial support for all of the policies as well, which was really pleasing to see. And of course, in light of the election result, extremely important. And I think the positive response from Labor here was the result of a few factors. One being that Labor intuitively knew that these policies were popular with the Australian public. They also, we had a track record of working with them in a pretty constructive way over their term of government and supporting the policies that they had committed to at the last election. And I think we also presented, as a movement, as a very united and coordinated front as well, which made it easier for Labor again to acknowledge the fact that we would have a presence at the forthcoming election, at the last election, the 2025 election, and that Labor knew that we would be communicating these positions to millions of people within the Australian public. So they had that incentive to come on board with supporting most, if not all, of these policies.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jed. Okay, I'm going to take us back a step now to look at how this political engagement kind of fitted into our overall campaign timeline. So the political engagement is one part of it. But since January, before we in fact knew the date of the election, we as a collection of organisations have been running advertising under the Keep the Sheep Here banner. And that advertising was made possible with the support of the partners in that campaign, Animals Australia and Stop Live Exports, based in WA. And we did that really to make it clear to Australians that the live sheep phase out was at risk. Those ads were mostly aimed at a Western Australia audience, because that's where the campaign to overturn the ban was largely based. And once we knew the position of the major parties on retaining the phase out, the ads under that campaign included scorecards. So those scorecards started in April, and they reflected party positions on that one issue. And then the advertising campaign that we ran for the federal election as a whole, that came a few days later, also ran in April right up to election day. So this is what some of those ads look like for the Keep the Sheep Here campaign. As I said, mostly based in Western Australia. They included outdoor billboards, social media ads, even a truck driving around Perth with the party positions on live sheep exports on. And overall, I think we had these ads in about 380 different locations, and they generated over 5.1 million impressions. So that's over the whole course of that advertising period. People were seeing this campaign. In terms of our election scorecards for the full suite of policy asks, these ran nationally on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and reached over 1 million people through that advertising. And one of the things we saw was for us, one of the strongest ever click-through rates. So that's when you engage with one of these ads, and then that takes you to further information and specifically to our website where you can see the specific scorecard. So that was much higher for these ads than for our previous campaign, our election campaigns, and much higher than what's called the industry average. So that's what the normal rate of interacting with paid ads on social media. We also ran electorate-specific ads across not all of the 18 electorates from us, but from our partners. We covered all of those electorates. And we used scorecards that listed the actual candidates in that electorate. So you can see here as an example from Mayo and another one from McKellar. These ads reached roughly 50% of voters in each of those targeted electorates. So that's where the real kind of power of this selected advertising can come in. And while we don't always know how much impact these specific ads can have, sometimes it's really clear. Here's an example of the scorecard in Kooyong, in the Melbourne city of Kooyong. So we hadn't received a response from Monique Ryan, who is the Teal independent incumbent in that seat and who did go on to win that seat. We knew she supported some of our policies, but she hadn't answered the request from us on all of the policy asks. But when the ads went live, her office got in touch and gave support. So at that point, we update the scorecard for a candidate. So if they then make that commitment that they will support the policy ask, we will reflect that in an updated scorecard. So what happened next? What were the results of all of this? And I will hand over to you, Jed, to talk about that.
Thanks, Bidda. Yeah, so of course, we all know the outcome of the election, which was that Labor was returned with an overwhelming majority, and indeed one of the largest majorities, I think, since World War II, which, came as a surprise to really everyone. No one really predicted that they would achieve that kind of majority. The polls were definitely showing that Labor is likely to be returned. But there was still, quite a number suspecting that it would be a minority government, but that didn't turn out to be the case. But when it comes to the particular electorates in which we were campaigning in, of those 18 seats, we saw that 13 and possibly 14, depending on the outcome in Bradfield, which is still where the votes are still being counted there. There's a recount going on, and the last time I checked, the difference was literally 2 votes, can you believe, out of about 112,000 being cast there in Bradfield. But in the other seats, 13 of the 18, the candidate that had the strongest policies on animal welfare was elected, or at least was showing the most support for our policies. So overall, in those seats, a pretty good result. I won't go into each individual one. There's a story to tell with all of them. If you've got any questions about any particular race in those seats, please let us know in the chat and we can talk about it at the end. I will just make a comment about the results in WA though, because as Bidda outlined, that's where the live sheep export campaign was a really prominent issue. We ran ads in 3 of those seats, Hasluck, Swan and Tangney. And the live export industry mounted a very vigorous campaign as well to really try to punish Labor in those seats and about 3 other seats as well. So they were targeting about half a dozen seats in WA. and they threw everything at it. They had, in some of the seats, their placards were just all over the place, and they were investing a lot of money in advertising in WA as well. But the results showed that Labor, in the seats that we targeted, the Labor candidate was returned with an even stronger swing than the average swing to Labor nationally, which was really positive to see. We also saw that in the new seat of Bullwinkle, which had a very large sort of rural component to that electorate, where the Liberal Party and indeed the National Party were quite confident in picking up that seat, that the Labor Party was even successful in that seat. And in the seat of Curtin as well, where Kate Chaney, the independent, was running for re-election, and she was very much targeted again by the industry's campaign quite aggressively, and even she was returned in that seat. So Labor maintained all of their seats in WA and indeed picked up a couple of extra ones. So we saw that the industry's campaign really had zero effect on the outcome. In terms of the national results, as we know, that's the majority that Labor now has. They've succeeded in 94 electorates, which is, the most significant majority they've had in many decades. The Liberal Party, of course, lost many seats. Unfortunately, the Greens also suffered a loss of 3 seats, but they've maintained their position in the upper house, so they'll still have quite a bit of influence there. And the independents were largely returned as well, so they have about the same number as what they did in the previous parliament. So in the upper house, we see that Labor, if it has the support of the Greens, it can pass legislation with the numbers there. So Labor either needs the support of the coalition or the Greens to pass legislation in the upper house. So they in effect, they don't need to rely on the crossbench anymore in the upper house. But if there's changes to the number of Greens members or the number of Labor members in the upper house, then they may need to rely on some members of the crossbench. So you can never, rule them out completely or say they're irrelevant, because you never know what's going to happen in the new term of Parliament. But yeah, effectively, it's a Labor and Greens Parliament that we're looking at for the next term. So what does this all mean for animals? Well, it's really positive for animal welfare in light of the fact that we were able to get so many commitments, particularly from the Labor Party, from the government. It means that the phase out of live sheep exports is secured. If it was a tighter result and we were looking at the coalition being in a stronger position come the next election in 2028, it would have meant that live sheep exports would again have been a major election issue, because the phase out deadline is not until 1 May 2028. But with Labor now having such a commanding majority, it is fairly likely now, or their prospects are very good for being returned again and serving a third term, which again just means that the phase out is very likely to be maintained throughout the term of this government and indeed into the next. So that's really pleasing to see. And on all of the other policy reforms, of course, we have a lot of work to do, but constructive and positive work. It's about another 3 years of sort of building on reforms, rather than if the results were different and we had a coalition government, we would largely be in a position of having to defend reforms that were achieved over the last term of government. So it is pleasing to see that we'll be working on all of these policies. Labor didn't come on board completely with the National Animal Welfare Commission, but they did come on board with expanding the role of the Inspector General of Animal Welfare to include oversight of export abattoirs, where the majority of Australian sheep and cattle are slaughtered. So that will require legislative change. And of course, funding the Australian Animal Welfare Strategy, developing an animal welfare trade policy, expanding the trophy hunting import ban. That will also include legislative change. So all of these policies, we're going to have to dedicate some time to working on these, because we can't just sit back and expect Labor will implement them. We've got to maintain the pressure. We've got to continue campaigning to ensure that they are a priority for Labor in this term term of Parliament and that they are implemented in full. So it's going to be another busy 3 years and potentially another busy 6 years if Labor was to be returned, and we can really start building on some structural changes to the way animal welfare policy is governed in Australia. So a positive outlook, and even more broadly than that, I think the election results are really positive in the sense that it's demonstrating to a major political party, and indeed by virtue of that, all political parties, that they can be confident in pursuing progressive animal welfare policy reforms, even in the face of strong resistance from industry groups. Because as we've seen with the results here, the opposition that the industry mounted really had no effect. The policies were popular with the Australian public. And as a movement, we presented a very united, coordinated front. We reached millions of Australians to provide that acknowledgement for positive policies for animal welfare. And I think all of that's going to put us in good stead for working with the current government, but also in investing in future election campaigns and getting that policy support and providing the incentive for policy support from major parties and independents moving forward. So overall, it was a really successful campaign, and we've got a very positive landscape for creating more reforms moving into the future.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jed. And hey, we're ahead of time. This is good. We are going to throw it open to questions from the audience now. And just to get us started, there's a couple that have come up in the chat already. But if you would like to ask your question in person, please just put your hand up and we will ask you to unmute and ask it in person. So before we go to the hands up people, I just wanted to talk about two things. So one, in terms of the order of parties that are on the scorecard. As I said earlier, as a charity, we have to be really careful about how we present electoral material. It's all scrutinized, authorized, and has to fit with our charitable purpose. So one of the things that we do is we make a decision of order, not on the level of support, but on so the order on our normal scorecard is how many seats are there by that party or at this stage of government. So that's why the order was Labor, Liberal, Nationals, Greens, AJP. AJP don't have any seats in the federal parliament at all, but we always include the AJP in our scorecards because of their focus on animals and because of their support for our policies. So we've never been challenged on that yet, but that's why we have them in that order. In other things that we do, we might put them in an alphabetical order, but it's not an order that is reflective of the level of support. And then there's just another question about transparency, about costing, about the ads that we put out. And when you put ads on social media, there is information sitting behind that anyone can go and access. So it's possible to see what any organization is spending in terms of paid advertising on social media. So that's quite a good level of transparency in terms of one of the things that social media does, not so great in terms of all of the things that they do. And also, if you're involved in a high level of spending in an election campaign, you then have to declare that at the end of the financial year. And those organizations that spend a lot of money, I think it's over $250,000, become what's called a significant third party, and they have an even higher level of declaration of what they spent. However, it takes a long time to find that information, whereas the information on social media, it takes a long time for it to be published. The information on social media is pretty immediate. So there is a level of transparency in terms of people spending money on election advertising. Um, got one from Jade. Go ahead, Jade.
Um, Sorry, I can't see what I look like right now. I only just, oh, can you see me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Um, Something I was wondering to know is that based on, I guess, the learning experience, I guess with each election, you get a bit more experience in seeing how different things work out. For example, how the initial consensus about the independents having the control of power. Has there been any strong themes or ideas about like what this might mean for future elections, whether that might change the strategy of how the alliance wants to target, or whether there's any like future, I guess, learnings about in general, like campaigning about what this might look like for animals in future elections?
I'll let you go with that one,
Okay.
Jed.
Yeah, thanks, Jade. That's a great question, and yeah, we've now run, I think it's 5 election campaigns at a federal and state level, or maybe 6. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But and each one of those, we learn new things. We learn about what does work, what doesn't work, and particularly about the particular political dynamics of the election, and whether those dynamics are favourable to getting this policy support or not. And at the end of each election campaign, we do a pretty comprehensive evaluation report as well. So we look at all the stats and figures and the outcomes and the results that the campaign produced. And yes, I do. Agree with you that they're, looking at the broader political trends as well that are taking place federally. We're of course seeing a move away from the major political parties, more towards independents and other minor parties. So the spread of votes, it's not so much a two-party system anymore. It's very much spreading across a range of different parties and candidates. So we assess at the start of any sort of election cycle, sort of where the polling is at, and in terms of determining what seats we're going to target, and what our particular strategy is for the campaign. So it really does rely on getting that expert advice and knowledge, and then tailoring our campaign to the particular electoral and political dynamics of the campaign. So yeah, but we are, I think, learning a lot, and we adapt our approach for every campaign.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jen. I was just about to read out a question from Di Roberts, but she's put her hand up and she's going to ask it herself. Thank you, Di. Oh,
Hi, sorry. Just really quick one. What's your stand on the effects of animal agriculture having on climate change? I know that there's at the moment that there's a young group of people actually taking them to the Human Rights Court at this moment in time, taking the government there because, they're not doing what they should do about climate change. So where do we stand on animal agriculture and climate change?
thanks, Di. It's a huge issue in terms of the effect of agriculture and the emissions that are associated with agricultural industries. At this stage, we have already engaged with government processes in the last term in terms of their net zero plan in relation to agriculture. We will continue to do that, although it isn't a primary part of the Alliance's work. Our members are doing more work in that space. We have asked our members in terms of if there are things that we can work on to help coordinate activity in that area. We will do more of that, because I think it is absolutely an issue that needs to be that there needs to be a lot more action, and certainly something that in this electoral term we'll be talking with our members about. But it isn't on our commitment list mainly because it's, it's an issue that requires a lot of coordinated work with our members. On Ben David, go ahead.
Hello. I don't know if it's working or not. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for that. I just wanted, I thank you for your comment about the transparency of the costing. It was my question. I still strongly feel that we, the animal welfare movement and rights animal welfare movement that are so much preaching for to become very much cleaner and more structural and more methodical. I think we should be, and you should put some information out about the costing of the advertisement. I've heard all what you said. It's still, in the eye of the public, extremely poor transparency. That's issue number one. Issue number two that I wanted to raise, and that I think it is important that on the topics that we are using, and I acknowledge the success and I accept the success, although I view that success more as a stimulation for us to work and you to work a lot harder, because I think it just opened the door. The Pandora's box has just been slightly open. It's far from feeling that we've got it all. And I think it is important to maybe try and just making a focus, keeping focus on the things that have the maximum effect on the maximum number of animals that are being involved. And that is why I put that suggestion up earlier on with regard to animal welfare labeling for processed food, trying to harness the consumers who purchase that. And Australia is in an excellent position because we don't have a standard. In Europe, we have 4 or 5 or 6 different standards. It is a mess to try and join them together. We have no standard as such, and we really have to consider doing something, because that's help the farmers, help the animals, but also help harnessing the consumers into that equilibrium. Thank you.
Thanks, Son. I'll take that as a comment rather than a question. I'm not sure there was a question, but no, take that on board. It's good to have that feedback.
Just in relation to the transparency question about the funding of the advertising, on all of that's required to be disclosed. So once you go over the threshold of about $16,500, any entity that has spent more than that on political campaigning needs to disclose that in an annual return after the election. So all of that will be on the public record in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question from Jordan. What are Labor's current hesitations about fully supporting an independent commission of animal welfare?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So Labor's main hesitation is that after committing to renewing the Australian Animal Welfare Strategy, they essentially foresee that is the necessary first step, I guess, in terms of creating a national framework for bringing jurisdictions together, for bringing major stakeholders together to agree on that pathway forward for Australia's animal welfare policy and standards development. So it's not that Labor has completely rejected the idea of a national commission. It's just that in order to set one up, it very much requires that national framework and the national buy-in from the different jurisdictions, because of course, in order to, I guess, make that model of a national commission work effectively, it would need the support of the state and territory jurisdictions as well. So it's certainly something we will be progressing with the government and indeed with key state governments as well, because of that federated model of our system of government in Australia. And looking forward to the next election as well, we'll be seeking commitments again for a national commission. And should the animal welfare strategy be set up and be working effectively, in our view, the next logical step is for a commission to be created to effectively administer a national strategy. So we'll absolutely be revisiting that with the Labor government in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Jed. Beck Ayres has also asked a sort of similar question in terms of us talking about the push for a National Animal Welfare Commission, but particularly what supporters can do to try and progress this. And I think, that, as you said, we're aiming for this at a national level, but we're also looking at this kind of independent governance structure at the state level. At the moment, we are really pushing that in New South Wales because the New South Wales government have made a commitment towards some kind of independent Office of Animal Welfare. And we have been running some supporter activities there, and we'll be continuing to do that. Obviously, state governments take more notice of people who are talking to them from their own state in around the country as opportunities arise. So as there are state elections or reviews of animal welfare legislation or any opportunity that comes our way at the state level to push for this really, really important governance reform, we'll be doing that. So, and one of the things that we would like to do is have more reach in terms of being able to do more of this work at the state level. At the moment, we've kind of constrained by our funding in terms of how many jurisdictions we can work with. But this is a really, really important part of what we do, and we'll certainly be continuing to provide supporters with opportunities whenever they arise to really push this. Another question that has come up is about the live export ban, and well, two questions really about this. So one is, can it still be repealed if there were a change of government, or could it be brought in sooner? Jed, I'll leave you to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, legislation can always be repealed. I don't see any indication of that, certainly not coming from Labor. I mean, the industry has just thrown everything at them in this election. Their main call was put Labor last in a bunch of seats in WA. They failed in that objective. So I don't think they've won any friends within the government because of that campaign. So certainly don't see Labor proposing legislation to repeal its own policy. If in a future election the coalition does get back in, of course, and they have the numbers, they can always repeal legislation. The question would be whether there would be any appetite whatsoever from the industry to try and restart the trade. If the industry had already invested in those adjustments and they've moved away from the trade, there's probably going to be little appetite to try and start it up again from the industry itself. So yes, it's always a possibility. Legislation could be repealed, but yeah, I think it's going to be very unlikely that there would be appetite for doing that, and certainly not in the current term of Parliament.
Yeah, thanks, Jed. Another question from Liz Dillon is, will the Alliance put on the agenda the long phase-out time for battery cages? So just to be clear, that wasn't on our election scorecard because at the stage that it's at now, this is something to be implemented at the state and territory level. We've got standards and guidelines that have been endorsed by all state and territory ministers. They have only been implemented in WA to date. ACT has already banned battery cages. We are working on, with our members, we are working on that implementation process. We are very unhappy about the length of time it's taking to get those standards and guidelines implemented. Also, it is an incredibly long phase-out time. So those two things are on our agenda. We have a number of issue-specific campaigns that we work on. That is one of them. We're also working on the phase out of live lamb cutting or mulesing, and we are also working on trying to get commitments to better on the better chicken commitment for meat chicken welfare. So there are three issue-based campaigns that we are involved in with our members. Those weren't featured in this campaign because they weren't things that we were taking to a federal government. But yeah, that's where we're up to with battery cages. Another question for you, Jed, I think, should we be advocating strongly to fund cell-based meat, especially initially for companion animal food?
Oh, that's a very specific question. It is something that has been considered within our election policies as well. And it's something that, again, should collaboratively with our members, they see an opportunity for the Alliance to pursue those sort of policies with the current government, then we, of course, we'll be open to doing that. So funding and providing those incentives, policy incentives for cultivated meat industries to be established in Australia. I also saw a question about how to prevent legislation banning the production of cultivated meat as well. So that would also be something that we, if there was any suggestion or proposals of that nature, it would be something that the Alliance, together with our members, could oppose and mount a pretty vigorous campaign against that. So yes, it's in other words, it's on our sort of peripheral agenda, but it isn't a core reform agenda at the moment for the Alliance.
Thanks, Jed. I think I'll just sneak one response to one more question in because we're nearly at time. And this is about the schism between animal sentience being acknowledged in legislation and where industry is the exploitation of animals by industry. This is something that is kind of again really key to our Fair Go for Animals framework, trying to close this schism and really try and make sure that animal welfare standards reflect current science and public expectations. Recognizing sentience in legislation is really key to that. It's only the first step though. But getting it in there into legislation is really important. But we are working really, really strongly in terms of that lifting the use of science and community expectations, trying to get that match to be a lot better. It's one of the things that is really holding animal welfare back in Australia is the fact that we are lagging so far behind in terms of standards when it comes to what we know animals experience, the importance of positive welfare, all of that. We know all of that, and it's just not reflected in the standards and the legislation that we have. So it's a really important part of what we do. But I think that is definitely time for us to wrap up. I've seen the clock turn over to after 7. If sorry, I'll just put the last slide up. We do have one. So what's next for us? We have got a very busy 3 years ahead of us in terms of the next electoral term. So keep an eye on your inbox so that you can see any upcoming actions that we might be having where we can involve you, our supporters. If you'd like to donate to support our campaigns, that QR code on the screen will take you to our website. But yeah, look, thank you so much for coming along. Thank you for all your questions. We're always so impressed at the level of engagement that you have with our work, but also the intelligence in your questions. So it's been a pleasure having this webinar and chatting to you, and we hope to see you again next time. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.